Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Back again at Let's Talk About Data show with me, Lydia Rare, your host. Also, on my day today, I'm Senior Analytics Solution Architect at AWS. Wherever you are, I'm based in the UK, by the way. So, wherever you are, pop in the chat, say hello, let me know where you're streaming from so we know like where's our audience is. And today with me, I have Kevin. He is a rock star. In our previous show, there's always a lot of demand about Kevin to have Kevin in the show again. So we have Kevin today. I will let Kevin introduce himself first.
It is
Go, Kevin.
fantastic to be here, by the way. It is fantastic to be here. So, my name's Kevin Phillips. I'm a senior specialist solutions architect working in the Amazon Neptune team. So, I work with lots of customers, obviously in the graph space. More recently, there's been a lot of talk around about GraphRAG, Graph and Gen AI, and those types of things. So, it's really great to actually join you on awesome platform to actually be able to talk about it.
Thanks, Kevin. Before we jump into the topic, for those are new to this show, you're welcome to see our past shows all about data, analytics, AML, everything is in there. Just go to that link, community.aws/livestream/let's dash talk dash about dash data. Okay, let's see like who is joining. There's some people from Chicago. Hello, tuning from Chicago. Good morning. And also we have Tony is our chat moderators today.
Hey.
Any questions? He will help to answer that. And hello, Marzena Pugo. And then there is some people from Romania. Hello, Romania. Nice to meet everyone.
Indeed.
Anyway, I'm just gonna jump into the topic because I've experienced this speaking with Kevin. So many questions. So let's just use the whole time talk about graph, rack, and rack. Kev, okay, rack. I did my search last week. I did my search. What is graph rack? What is rack? What's the difference? And then I just curious, like how many people actually search about rack or graph rack? And there's a very significant difference. So, what is it? What is graph rack, and why is it different from the normal rack solutions?
Sure. So I think GraphRAG. I'll take that slightly step back on that. So there are basically GraphRAG is sort of one of, I guess, four approaches that we actually see with customers working with Gen AI and Graph. And those themselves are kind of like split into two. So whereby you bring your own graph, and you want things like natural language querying. And again, natural language querying that can be sort of open domain type natural language querying. So, like I say, you bring your own graph and you use an LLM to effectively create something like an open cipher or a cipher query to generate your cipher query based on the schema of your graph. That would then execute it on the graph, and then the results back, so the nodes and the edges and the effective relationships that come back to the LLM, that would then summarize and then provide you with sort of a natural language response. So that is kind of like I say, your natural language querying. And then and that's sort of open domain. You might have closed domain, whereby I would ask a natural language question, and the LLM, instead of creating the query itself, would effectively sort of pick out parts of the question and use them as parameters for sort of a more templated query. So that way, I'm really, as a data architect, as a graph architect, I'm actually narrowing down which parts of the graph they can actually query through natural language. So those are kind of like, I'm bringing my own graph, a BYOKG, bring your own knowledge graph. I've already got a graph. I just want some way to provide business users with a more natural way of querying it. So I don't need everybody to learn the language.
Sorry, when you say graph, I know like some people like already expert in graph databases and so on, but there's some people just joining, just working in databases or analytics or AML. But like graph, if I can simplify, is also another like a bunch of data or databases but the structure is in such a way look like a graph, not like you bringing, bar chart is not that we're talking about.
No,
Just to make
absolutely.
sure
And
everyone.
funnily enough, I was on a call yesterday actually with my niece, and we were talking about graphs and charts. It's like, no, they're charts. That's still a chart. And it's like, no, graph and graph sort of graph in mathematics and stuff like that. That's been around for centuries. But more recently, graph databases, they're kind of like they're a way to naturally model the world. We can do it right here. It's like Kevin knows Lydia. That would be two nodes, Kevin node and a Lydia node, and there'll be a relationship between the two that would be like nodes, for example. That's a really natural way of modeling out our interaction. Obviously, we've got many people on the call, so they could be these people joined a call which was hosted by Lydia or presented by Kevin. So these are sort of, they aren't just circles and lines between them. They're a really natural way of actually modeling the real world. So I that's why I love it, to be honest, because it's the potential is sort of infinite, really, on how you actually want to whatever you want to model. So it's a very good way, but sort of tying that back to the sort of the graph and Gen AI aspect is you don't actually want people, or you don't need people to know exactly how your graph is modeled, and
Okay.
that is like like I say, I bring my, if you're my business user, and I built a graph platform that modeled modeled like document hierarchies.
Okay.
The way that my document is actually modeled, like, you probably don't really care about it. Don't you're not that's not your primary use case. You want to know, okay, show me all the paragraphs related to X, or show me all the pieces of documentation related to Y, or something like that. Now, you don't know how the document the document hierarchy is actually modeled in graph. Now, that's where things like Llama index, LangChain, they come into it, whereby they kind of like act as the sort of the middle layer, where they integrate with the LLM, they integrate with the graph database, Neptune in this case. They move the sort of the requests and responses between the two, and they provide that interface whereby you can simply say, what is, show me documents that relate to XYZ, uses the schema of the Neptune database, passes that as part of the prompt to the LLM. The LLM effectively creates a graph query for you, executes that on your database. The results are then sent back to the LLM for summarization, and then you get the answer. And so, from a business perspective, I've got exactly what I wanted, and I don't really need to know about the graph.
Okay. And then what is the difference then? We already have RAG. It sounds similar, and then that's not show like so much difference. But why we like want to use GraphRAG over the RAG, or use the other way around? Which
Sure.
use cases fit one or the other?
Sure. So GraphRAG, so I've been talking about natural language querying. So GraphRAG is effectively the other side. So that's where
Okay.
you're actually building your graph, or you're letting an LLM build your graph for you from unstructured data. So you might have and this is a demo that I've got that we've got later on. It's sort of, you've taken a lot of unstructured data, you put it in S3 or something like that, and then you're kind of like doing a lot of entity extraction, which then creates your graph effectively. So you don't have a huge level of knowledge about graphs, but you want to sort of either visualize or sort of build up your documents within a graph, so you can do things like semantic searching. So obviously, as we know, RAG is based on semantic searching.
Yeah.
What's similar in the vector space, and Neptune Analytics being a vector data store, it supports vectors. But and this goes to your questions, like why would I use it? Is GraphRAG or RAG on GraphRAG basically provides you with that semantic or capability to do it on a semantic level. But then it says, okay, well, now I've got similar things. Actually, show me what's connected to those. Do a like a neighborhood traversal, so I can see things
Okay.
like, okay, well, this is related to. I might search. I don't know. I might do a search. What's different between Neptune Analytics and Neptune Database, for example, and it shows me exactly what's different. But then it can traverse out. So semantically, I might find exactly what I want, but
Yep.
then it might do a traversal outwards and say, okay, well, actually, this is supported, or this is supported, or so you kind of get the connected nature of the data along with semantic searching.
Okay, so I'm just thinking like what possible use case, like for example, like personalizations, all those things. It enhance the typical use case for this kind of GraphRAG database. Like if someone like chatting to LLM application or things like that, you get like more similar context instead of just going to the knowledge bases and so on reply. But because you have the context in the graph, so you know like okay, potentially the person are gonna talk about this thing as well. Is that
Yeah.
a similar case? Okay, that makes sense. For by the way, for those who just joined, we just talk about graph RAG and the difference between graph RAG and RAG, how what is exactly like we can leverage like graph databases with RAG, with LLM, with the knowledge bases in Bedrock.
I was going to say one common use case that we actually see, or I say common, it's we spent 2024, lots of customers, lots of people actually sort of looking at it and sort of
Yep.
devising use cases for it. 2025, we're seeing a lot more sort of activity, and certainly one use case which is sort of more predominant is like the regulatory sort of customers in regulatory industries. So might have a corpus of documents, so lots of PDFs that relate to specific guidelines, specific regulations, and things like that. Now, generally speaking, and I say very generally because it obviously depends on the industry, it's going to be, some of them are going to be quite difficult to read and understand. You might need a specialist to actually go through them. Some might be
Okay.
hundreds and hundreds of pages long. So what we're trying to do and what we're seeing is that customers are actually building a knowledge graph out of that to do entity
Okay.
extraction to then apply. And this is sort of like, say, for example, GDPR. They might take a regulatory documentation relating to GDPR, and then they may then look. They've got a policies database and stuff like that, and they might start to actually go,
Yeah.
okay, which policies actually apply to which sections of GDPR, and also why. And then sort of then you kind
Okay.
of like, you're connecting your graph up with your existing knowledge base potential knowledge
Yep.
graph, and you can do loads and loads of stuff. So like I say, when you're doing a semantic search, you're
Yep.
finding exactly what relates to what you're searching for. When you're
Yep.
doing a traversal based research or search, you're actually looking for stuff that's connected to. So that might be positive, and that might also be in a negative space. So for example,
Okay.
you like, what do I need to fulfill this GDPR requirement? This,
Right.
but also you don't want to be doing this. Like your graph, depending on how you model it, that's how your graph can actually work.
Okay. That's very interesting. Let me quick look at the chat. There is some people. Okay, there's one questions related to specific to Neptune. From Peter Joe, does Neptune support LPG or RDF? Can we
Label
define our
property graph.
ontology before generating KG?
So Neptune does support. So hey, Peter. So thank you for the question. Does Neptune support label property graph and RDF? It supports both. So excuse me. So both Neptune database and Neptune Analytics support label property graph and RDF. Can we define our ontology before generating a knowledge graph? So currently, you can't define your ontology. If you're wanting to use something like GraphRAG, then it's not a bring your own knowledge graph, sort of not bring your own ontology. And I'll show you sort of how the ontology is kind of like works, the sort of schemas around there. but yeah, a lot of customers, when they're actually building their knowledge graph, so outside of the GraphRAG, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, you can actually build, you can bring your ontology, and generally, in all honesty, if you're new to graph, that's exactly where I'd start. It's sort of Neptune itself is like schema on write, so that would be effectively be based on exactly what you want to or how you want to build your graph model.
Okay. There is another follow-up question from Peter Joe. Like you mentioned RAG and GraphRAG. Are we not considering KAG and CAG? Is it the one that you just explained, Kev? Or
Uh, KAG and CAG? I'm not familiar.
okay.
Sorry, it
Peter,
should be.
if you can explain the abbreviation that you meant, that would be great. Okay. Uh, okay, carry on with this graph discussion. So I assume because we in AWS show, so what is the latest like offering around graph and RAG use
Yeah, sure.
cases within
So
AWS?
yeah, absolutely. So at reInvent, we launched sort of two effectively GraphRAG tools. The first is a fully managed service integration with Amazon Bedrock. So it's part of the Amazon Bedrock knowledge bases, which was launched in preview. Effectively, it provides a really simple managed process of creating a knowledge graph from documentation that's currently sitting in sort of S3, for example. I'll actually showcase that shortly. So that was one of our sort of integrations that we really the service team worked very hard with the Bedrock team, kind of like made that integration sort of a seamless approach, and yeah, it works really well. And like I say, I'll be demonstrating sort of the ease of which you can actually put it together. The other sort of launch at reInvent was actually something called the GraphRAG toolkit. So this was developed by one of our principal graph architects, Ian Robinson, and he wrote in so that you could effectively you could write code and sort of more sort of knobs and buttons, so you can basically do a much more customized approach to creating your knowledge graph out of, again, documents, but or effectively unstructured data. I shouldn't say documents; it's unstructured data. So there's lots of it integrates with Llama Index. So pretty much the things that you can do with Llama Index, you can also integrate into the GraphRAG toolkit. Which makes it kind of like if you're already working with Llama Index and knowledge graphs, that's a really great way of actually sort of doing that. And with the GraphRAG toolkit, you've actually then got the option to either use sort of Neptune database or Neptune Analytics as your graph store. You can use Neptune Analytics or indeed OpenSearch as your vector store. So there's lots of sort of options around that.
How about is it any vector source? I mean, like we have the range of like OpenSearch, also like PG vectors, and so on. Can we use any
At the
kind of
moment, yeah, sure. At the moment, OpenSearch is supported as a vector store. Neptune Analytics is supported as a vector store. There are more on the way, to be honest. It's an active development. Absolutely.
Okay.
It's completely sort of open source. It's on GitHub. There's a GitHub repository. There's also a launch blog for it as well. So I definitely suggest anybody on the call taking a look at that. It's really good. Again, sort of demonstrate actually using that.
Just a clarification from question from Peter before. So KAG is knowledge augmented graph and CAG is cache augmented generations. Is this something you're familiar or?
Not offhand. I mean, knowledge augmented graph. So how does that differ in terms of sort of knowledge graph? And forgive the question, Peter. It's not a topic that I'm overly familiar with.
Okay, no worries. So by the way, for those of you who just joined, we're just talking about the GraphRAG solution on AWS, leveraging Amazon Bedrock, and also we have the GraphRAG toolkit. So Kevin just explained how Graph can like complement RAG solution that you have, especially like for example documentation. It's not just looking for when you search in the RAG, it's not looking just for like a similar search, but also like what is the connection of the particular things that you ask, so it can generate more rich informations. And in AWS, we offer other GraphRAG using Bedrock, or the other one is open source based, right? Built
Yes,
by
correct.
our own principal architect. It's called GraphRAG Toolkit Demo. And I think Tony will share all the links that relevant to the topic that we are talking about today. Okay, Kev. So there's a lot of talk about graph. I think people want to see like what does it looks like in actions.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's dive over to the console now. So so this is the Neptune console. We've got Neptune databases. We've also got Neptune graphs. I'm going to dive over to Neptune graphs here, and I've got a few. So basically, I've created some knowledge graphs myself. I've also created this knowledge graph. This graph itself has actually been created through the Bedrock knowledge base process. So basically, I'll show you. So my use case here was effectively taking the Amazon Neptune documentation and all of it from our website. And what I wanted to do was actually build not just something that you can Q&A with, more sort of conversational, actually understand sort of very common questions that you see in the docs, but sometimes the docs aren't immediately easy to find. Things are easy to find there. So I wanted to actually make something quite easy to do. So what I did was I wrote some code with basically ending up with effectively every single HTML file within the website. So we've got 463 here, and we can just scroll through, and these basically the title of each of the documents that are available. So once that was done, and that was very simple.
I'm gonna stop you. Sorry, like you have two databases, one like Bedrock one is like the Neptune one. What is the information again? Is it both the Neptune documentation or?
Yeah, so exactly. So this one's actually powered and created by Neptune, by the Bedrock knowledge base process. This one I just created specifically for the use of the GraphRAG toolkit. So I'm going to demonstrate both today. They both work off exactly the same data set. Just one is stored in S3 and the other is actually stored locally on my notebook. So, but yeah, basically. So once I actually downloaded that, and again, that was actually on my notebook, I just moved it all to S3. And then once it's in S3, we can actually start the process of kind of like using this as a data store for my Neptune graph. So I'm going to dive into Amazon Bedrock. I'm going to go to knowledge bases. And let's just scroll there. So I've already created knowledge base. I didn't want to take up too much time here. So I've got Neptune docs knowledge base here. So all I can do, I can just go, I'm just going to click straight into it, just so you can start actually seeing some of the, just so you can start seeing some of the bits and pieces around it. So every knowledge base, if you're unfamiliar with Bedrock knowledge bases, every knowledge base actually has or needs at least one data source, to actually work. So when it makes sense, right? so here we're using S3 as our data source, and we can look at the bucket. Here's our bucket, Bedrock Neptune docs KB knowledge base. You can see that up here at the top. And all I really did was I just added that and just basically synchronized it. And it's very simple. I mean, I'll synchronize it now. You'll see that it probably takes about 2 or 3 minutes, possibly even less. And what that's doing is cycling through the documentation, checks for any changes. It's building. Oh, look, there you go. So there are no changes since I last synchronized. As part of its initial synchronization, so when you create the knowledge base, behind the scenes, it's creating a Neptune Analytics graph, which we saw. So it creates a small graph. Then once you actually do the initial sync, that's where you're doing entity extraction. So the LLM, and you can specify which LLM does it. The LLM is effectively performing entity extraction. It's performing, it's creating vectors within your graph. So hence why Neptune Analytics is being used as opposed to Neptune Database. And then it starts actually linking those nodes together through effectively actionable edges. So it might be like contained or things like that. So we can really see you at the moment. It's all completely managed. So like the synchronization is finished. So basically, we want to now go and ask our model something. Ask our graph something, I should say, not our model. So we want to go and ask our graph. I've done no coding here. This is the only coding I did was actually get the initial data source. But apart from that, I've done no coding. So let's go and
Basically, the coding part is just the ingestion part that you.
That's just the ingestion. To be honest, in most cases, I purely did it because I needed the documentation. So I basically did a web scrape of our documentation.
Okay.
In most cases, what customers are going to do is they're going to actually take their existing documents. So it might be PDFs, Word, those types of documents, effectively unstructured data, and they're going to put it in S3. So they won't necessarily need to do that coding. Absolutely. So I'm going to go and choose Claude 3.5 Sonnet as my model. And then I'm going to, very simple question, say, what are the differences between Neptune Database and Neptune Analytics? So big question there. So let's just see if we can move that. Let's, where are we? Close that down. Sorry. Right, what are the differences between Neptune Database and Neptune Analytics? Right. Okay, so basically, would you believe it? Okay, so let's see if we can run that again. I might just have to dive over to. Okay, so that's going to be that's Bedrock basically saying that we've asked too many questions. Let's just change it to a different model and let's just see if we can just run that.
No worries.
Okay, so this is now using Haiku, but you can see if I just scroll up a little bit. So it's providing. I can read through this and I can see that it's actually taking pretty much what is exactly from the documentation. It's doing some summarization in places, but fundamentally it's actually reusing that documentation as its knowledge, as its basically as its source. What's great with knowledge bases is that you can actually it actually shows the sources. So it basically provides that level of explainability to the results, which as sort of Gen AI applications become more and more prevalent, that's pretty much like our number one ask is sort of, well, okay, well, how do you know? How do you know that it's telling the truth? And that's kind of like where knowledge basing fundamentally comes from. So it's really cool. You can actually, like I say, these link to the S3, the actual S3 document that it resides in, which would be, which is effectively the URL. So that's, like I say, it's really cool. The only code I've written was part of the ingestion. So it makes it a very, very simple yet powerful tool to just start using. I wanted to build a GraphRAG application. I don't really know much about Graph, but I've got lots of documents. Here we go. It's a very, 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 very powerful tool.
There's
now,
one question.
Go for it.
Where is the entity extraction being done and where is that stored? Can you show us what that looks like?
So the entity extraction is, I don't think the actual, I'll need to check, but I don't think the actual extraction, I don't think you can actually see it. It's not sort of checkpointed in the same way as the GraphRAG processes. But I'll certainly find that out, and I'll post that to the question.
One more question. I think it's more related to Neptune itself or graph only. Can you talk about the number of nodes in the graph that are supported?
A number of nodes actually in Neptune. So Neptune database can support up to about 400 billion nodes, 400 billion objects.
Okay.
Now that includes like nodes, edges, properties. So that's kind of like all encompassing. I mean, to be honest, we see customers with multi-billion node graphs, very, very large graphs. And they'll have multi-billion edges as well. Generally, you see more edges than nodes within a graph. So Neptune at the moment, Neptune database currently supports up to 128 terabits of storage. So which sort of equates to about 400 to 600 billion objects. Neptune Analytics is slightly different. It's modeled, it's sort of architected completely different. It's memory based. But we've effectively the largest graph that you can immediately provision is 1024 MNCUs, which is like memory Neptune capacity units, which is basically one MCU is 1 gig of memory. So it's about a terabyte of basically around a terabyte of data. So again, very large graphs in the same way.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Carry on with the demo.
No worries. So this is just demonstrating sort of Amazon Bedrock knowledge bases with GraphRAG. So what I want to now do is I'm going to dive back onto the console. So that was actually using this graph here. I'm now going to use this graph here. So this is one I just created. I created an empty graph. I created let me dive into it a little bit more here. So basically you create an empty graph with a vector dimension of 1024. Okay. And again, like I say, completely empty. So what I did was I then created a notebook to start using GraphRAG toolkit. So this basically is the website crawler example. Like I said, it used exactly the same data set. It crawled the URLs, it downloaded them. I show you basically the original source files on original HTML files, sorry, actually on this local notebook. But what I actually want to showcase is sort of its process. So let me just scroll up for a little bit. You can how we actually, and this is actually all examples from the GitHub repository. So
we can get this. All of this code is available in GitHub, and everyone can download and try it.
Absolutely, 100%. So what's great as well. So Ian's actually put together some CloudFormation scripts as well, so you can sort of so basically provide you with a one-stop shop for this. There are different ways depending on. So many people have different delivery modes for their data. So some would be streaming, some would be like create my graph once and just leave it. And the example of this actually here. But fundamentally, sort of, there's many different. This is sort of using the advanced template because what I wanted to showcase is actually all the sort of, like I say, the knobs and levers of what you can actually do in terms of over what Bedrock provides. So or the Bedrock integration provides. So in this case, I can start actually changing sort of the entity classification. I can set the sentence splitters, all these sort of things. Now you can do that through Bedrock, and I think it's but if you wanted to do it more programmatic way, this is sort of this is the programmatic way of actually doing that. So what's cool about it is you've got two things when you're actually setting this up. So first of all, you've got something called checkpointing. Checkpointing is great because if, for example, during the extraction process, the process fails or something like that, if you've got checkpoints enabled, it basically starts from that last checkpoint. You don't have to reprocess every single thing. And if you've got really large documents, I think I've got 450 something, 60 something HTML files here, not huge. If you've got massive documents with like a lot of documents, that's going to take a long. You don't want to keep redoing that. So checkpointing is a great great thing to implement. Next, you've got yes, go for it.
Checkpointing is for when you're building that like graph, like all the connection and so on. That's checkpointing, so you don't have to start again from scratch.
Exactly. It's all part of the extraction process, indeed. Yeah. Then this is kind of like the great customization of using toolkit. So you can use basically the examples given in the GitHub repo is actually using Neptune database as your graph store and then using OpenSearch as your vector store. Now, what I did was I wanted to actually demonstrate that both within Neptune. So within Neptune Analytics. Now, this is fundamentally the kind of like the point of this is that you can mix and match. You can say, okay, I do want to use Neptune and OpenSearch, or similarly when PG Vector's supported, I might want to use that. So those types of things you can kind of like it can be customized around your existing architecture. I won't dive into all of these because I know sort of for time, but fundamentally what these do is they use Llama index defined objects, or certainly sort of Llama index defined sort of functions and methods. The GraphRAG toolkit is kind of like an extension, sort of a wrapper for some of the Llama index things. So you can kind of use if you've been using Llama index previously, you can probably read this and go, okay, yeah, I know what a topic extractor is, sentence splitter. Okay, these are defined X, Y, Z. So it really provides a sort of quite a nice, easy way of actually doing creating your graph. And then once we build up an extraction pipeline, so that again uses LLM to actually perform entity extraction from the documents, and then the build pipeline is effectively what creates your graph and what does the indexing on the vectors. And this is simply like I say, this is just almost a copy and paste from the actual documents from the GitHub repository itself, but just sort of some bits added in for my specific use case. And what it does is this then effectively takes the documents, which is a list of basically a list of HTML files. It performs the entity extraction, then it's the build, and then it finalizes that. And this way, I will be completely honest with you, it's not optimized. There is a batch process, there's a batch mechanism, which would then almost then sends multiple chunks basically batches to the LLM for inference. This does not, so this takes slightly longer. But again, that's all in our documentation. That's all in the GitHub repository, and definitely worthwhile if you've got a lot of large documents.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, what do we actually want to get out of this? Is it a lot of coding kind of like what are you actually trying to do? So what we're trying to do is we want to sort of analyze the types of things. We basically want to answer the same sort of question. So here I've got what are the difference between Neptune database and Neptune Analytics? Exactly the same question as what I did in Bedrock. Using a slightly different model, so the answer will be slightly different. But fundamentally, I mean, I can read through that again. In fact, it actually looks exactly the same. So I've got Customer 360. It's for high optimal scalability and high availability. It shows me the source documents, source URLs as well, which is always cool. But what you can then start doing, so that's my summary. Great, fantastic. I've got my summary. So for a business end user, that's actually perfect. What I need. What I can then do is I can start looking at the response in slightly more detail. So, okay, what actually what made that response? And as you can see, these are all the, sorry, scrolling there. So these are the source, the topic that it was related to, and then the statements or the specific statements that actually went into that response. And now this is great for explainability, right? This is the ultimate goal, is to actually understand. It would be more fun, find out why an answer actually was included within the summary. So this is really cool, but for some customers, this is great, but it's not quite everything. And what's really cool is, because it's in a graph, you can actually start visualizing it. And I didn't really see the power of this until I actually did it, and I was like, that's actually really cool. So I'm going to skip down. There are many different types of, if you're familiar with graph, if you're sort of different traversal techniques, these will be very useful to you. Actually being able to re-rank chunks sort of as part of the query process. You can also do post processes as well.
Yep.
Again, very, very cool. But what I want to really get to is this bit here. So we have our response. So we've done a traversal based search. That is the default, effectively, if you're creating a sort of a lexical graph. Traversal based search, it's using both analytics for both graph store and vector store. I've got my responses. I've also got my sources, so I know basically where it's coming from. Now I can basically work out from this, like, I've got a source, so that's fundamentally the document. I've got topics within my source. I've got statements within those that are connected to topics. I've got facts that are connected to statements. So in your mind, you can almost start of go, okay, I can kind of see how this graph is built. And again, I mean, for an end user, this is not particularly useful because it doesn't actually represent anything. But one thing that is actually quite useful is the visualization itself. So this is, and I'm going to scroll, I'm going to show a little bit.
Is that the visualization of all the HTML documents that you have now?
Exactly
all
that.
the circle there, each of the individual HTML, and how it's related to each other, is it?
Exactly. So I can click on a source, say, for example, and let me just open this one up. So this source is effectively what is Neptune Analytics. And now I can click on a chunk, and this chunk effectively is this part of the document. So to perform intensive analysis, etc., etc., etc. So that is part of the chunk. Now the topic that relates to this chunk, and bear in mind, these are only, and this is actually loading data into Neptune Analytics. Now, so we've effectively got source, which is the document. We've got a chunk, which is appropriate to the question that I've been asking. Then we've got a related topic, and then we've actually got statements within these. So these would be, usage to describe that. So this is basically a statement when to use Neptune Analytics versus Neptune Database is described at this sort of page. And then we can start understanding the facts that are extracted from each topic or that relate to a statement. So we can say Neptune, and the fact is Neptune Database does support CSV. We can say Neptune Database bulk loads RDF. These are genuine facts. And from this, we can then answer, or the LLM can then answer the question better, because these are known things, right? This is effectively what we're using as a form of basis for our response. Sorry, go ahead.
I have a question. Like, so you have the chunks, you have documents, and then you have the purple one is fact. Is generated once you ingest data, you process it. When we talk about GraphRAG, this is the GraphRAG, and then if we ask question to LLM, it will refer to this graph and going to the facts. What the answer is? Okay.
Exactly. So this isn't actually a representation of my entire graph. This is just a representation of the source of basically the source nodes that came into that were part of the response, or part of the summary. Yeah, absolutely. So if I scroll up a little bit, effectively what we're doing is we're taking this JSON here, this JSON output of the source nodes. We're doing a bit of basically a sort of a transformation on it to provide, so in order to provide it as query parameters to our query, and we can see sort of like source parameters, these are fact parameters, these are statement IDs, and that gives us a
I'll
much easier
pause you
way.
there. There's a question around that area. What part of the process is creating graph association labels, statement, facts, and topics? This is from Haikan.
So the labels themselves are defined, so they're well-defined things, so you can easily traverse the graph. You know exactly what objects are actually being created. The LLM, as part of the GraphRAG toolkit, was it the prompting, as basically is doing that part of the extraction and then the building. So you have two steps. Effectively, you have extraction, which is the LLM part, which is basically doing sort of identifying the facts, the statements, the entities within those, etc., the topics, basically doing all the sort of what we know as node classifications, so chunk, source, topic, statement, etc. That's doing that, and then the build part is effectively putting it all together. So we kind of like, the graph toolkit effectively does that for you in a similar way the Bedrock knowledge bases does. Exactly. It's just the models differ between the two.
Okay, one more questions. This is again from Peter. Like, can we use large concept model instead of LLMs for creating KG here, if available on Bedrock of other providers? And for the last question, yes, this repo is available for public. Tony will share the
Yes.
link. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So large concept models, was that?
Yes. Are you familiar with that?
No, not familiar with large concept models. Yeah, if Peter's able to explain a little bit more, that'd be
Okay,
good.
if you can explain a little bit more. And I know some of the audience asking for, is it available for free tier?
Oh, pretty visualization. Yes. So at the moment, this is just through a notebook. So this is, if you're familiar with Jupyter notebooks, they're just like a Python IDE, integrated development environment. Sorry, IDE. So you can visualize the graph using Graph Explorer, which is, again, it's open source Graph Explorer. At the moment, Graph Explorer doesn't support things like natural language querying, so I wouldn't be able to do the same sort of thing. Or indeed, if I had this sort of templated query here, you won't be able to sort of. It's much more of an exploration, sort of point and click exploration. But fundamentally, that's kind of like that would provide better if you just wanted sort of a graph walkthrough. That provides very, very nice visualizations. Yeah, 100%.
Okay. And for those, there's multiple audience asking for the notebook or this code, the Graph Toolkit. Tony just passed it in the chats for everyone. Please get a link, and then you can have exactly the same notebook that Kevin just demo.
Yeah, so this is slightly different, but fundamentally, I think to be fair, I think the code examples are a bit clearer on the GitHub repository. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's really good examples there. How to split up, extract, and build stages. If you've got streaming data, if you want to do it in batch as well, really, really great examples.
Okay. Back to the demo, Kev.
Yeah, so so basically, I think where we see sort of customers going, but using like sort of, okay, fantastic, you've got two GraphRAG sort of solutions, as it were. Like, which one do you choose? And it's not sort of it's never a versus with AWS, is it? It's sort of, if you're new to Graph, if you want a very managed approach to it, then Bedrock knowledge bases is very much sort of where definitely a recommendation there. Because as you saw, I mean, I'd already ingested it, but fundamentally, if you've got your sources already, then like, or you put it in, do it in S3, you add it as a data source, and your graph is created. So it is a fully managed service, a fully managed service approach to GraphRAG. Now, if you're more from a builder perspective, you're more from a developer perspective, sorry, and you're excuse me, and you want to sort of play around with how the sort of how okay, I want to change sort of how the sentence splitter works, or what my overlap is, or I want to do some post processing, or like potentially like retrieval re-ranking and things like that. That's kind of like where the toolkit will definitely work for you. If you're trying to build sort of a more like Gen AI layer, as it were, so it's more programmatic out of the box, that's where I would recommend the GraphRAG toolkit. Indeed, also, obviously, if you've got multiple data sources, so you want to use Neptune as your graph database, but you actually want to use another vector store for your vectors, again, the GraphRAG toolkit will work quite well for you in sort of an encompassed sort of a solution for that.
So if I kind of like summarize it, like if you want to start quickly, everything is fully managed, is you can start quickly with Bedrock, but of course, moving towards more complex use case, a lot of customization, you might want to see this graph toolkit for some solutions follow up from on top of the Bedrock.
Absolutely, and that's not to say sort of Bedrock won't fit in with like productionized solutions, not at all. It's just, you're absolutely right. If you want the customization of different data sources under the same, I guess, sort of, I just want to query one thing. I don't want to have to bring in lots of different sort of knowledge bases or anything like that, or data sources and stuff. I just want to query. That's where the GraphRAG toolkit will work for you. And also, like I say, if you're building that sort of GraphRAG layer, it makes a lot of sense there.
One other question about the GraphRAG toolkit that you have. Of course, it's all like in Jupyter Notebook, it's all programmatics, but is there any like API that you can somehow build like a nice UI on top of it, if any of the audience thinking of that? Or
build a UI on top of it? Absolutely. I'll be honest. So these are, as you can see, I mean, these are just, this is an open cipher query. This actually, what I'm highlighting here is sort of is our magics, is our cell and line magics that we built into our notebooks. So this is basically saying this is an open cipher query, and that's it. And it passes some query parameters and things like that. Now, these you can put this into Lambda, you can put this into any sort of compute or anything like that to actually build an API on top of it. The results of these are, if I scroll down, actually, you'll notice the results of these are just JSON. So it makes it very, very easy. So we've actually got something called the neptunedemos.com. So that actually is just literally graph demos using Neptune. Different VSS lookup, or vector similarity search lookups, or just like security graph, identity graph, lots of different use cases, and that's actually a serverless approach to it. So it's using Lambda, it's using Neptune, obviously not using Neptune serverless as well. Sorry, I beg your pardon. And that's basically just moving JSON queries through, and then using the same visualization as Graph Explorer, which is just sort of a React component. So it makes it very easy. If you're building these types of things, it makes it very, very easy to actually get started.
One last question. So if we wanted to create custom association, the GraphRAG toolkit will be better here. And there's continuation of that questions. The context here is financial. X company is impacted by Y company. So it's in the financial service use case, I would imagine. What is your thought in that, Gav?
I think both, to be honest, would work well. It really depends on your sort of your build versus sort of managed solution approach, really. I think both will provide, if you've got documentation, both will provide a knowledge graph of which you can then use GraphRAG, Bedrock, LLMs to effectively query. Um, as long as obviously the data is in there. So as with any, like a database is only
Yeah.
good as the data you actually store, right? So as long as the data is actually sourced in there, it will still work. I'm actually using sort of with customers using sort of PDFs and things like that to build up exactly the same thing here. These PDFs can range from like a few tens of pages to hundreds and hundreds of pages. So as long as that source data is consumable, of which it's if it's in S3 or
Yeah.
sort of if it's just in local, you're going to get Bedrock will create a more simplistic model. There are fewer node labels with Bedrock. GraphRAG does create a more complex model, but fundamentally they're both trying to achieve exactly the same. I think it comes down to whether you're not you want to build something, or it might just be I just want to run a small POC. Let's just demonstrate that we can actually do this, as opposed to writing lots of lines of code to actually do it. So it very much depends on the persona, I think, but I don't see a problem using either approach.
Okay. Okay. We're almost on the top of the hour, but like if we want to summarize this GraphRAG and RAG use case, would you be able to share like what is the most common use case that you work on at the moment with this like graph use case? Is it that like documentations, linking documentation within the organization, or is there any other use cases that it makes sense to have this GraphRAG solutions?
I think mostly it's about actually taking unstructured documents and actually being able to identify things that are semantically similar, but also are just connected within the graph space. So it was interesting. There was that comment, the question, sorry, I should say, about financial industries, or within the financial industry. That's exactly kind of that's a really good use case for this. You're not just looking for semantically similar things. You actually want to understand how these different entities are actually connected. Potentially, if you're going out to regulations, how the policies applied to these. I mean, I worked a number of years in financial administration, so you're kind of like you're learning. You sort of understand. Okay, well, that's this type of instrument, or that's that type of portfolio. So these different rules apply to it. It's those types of use cases that we really see sort of GraphRAG sort of excelling at, because it's not just about this is semantically similar to GDPR, for example, but actually I want to understand what's actually I traverse 1, 2, 3 hops out of that. Now what do I actually see as they're connected to those types of things? So if you've got lots of documents which are potentially highly connected, that's where GraphRAG will fit in.
Okay, thanks very much, Kev. We are on the top of the hour. Who just joined, we still have the on-demand version in our community page. So go to our community page and you will see like this episode from the start and also our past episodes. Don't forget, next week, same day, Monday, 4 p.m. CET, 8 a.m. Pacific time, and 11 a.m. Eastern time. We're going to back in the show. Let's talk about data. Next week topic will be AWS in-memory solution and Valky open source innovations. Thank you very much. My name is Lydia Ray,
Nice.
and thanks for Kevin for joining the show today. See you everyone next week.
Absolute
Bye-bye.
pleasure. Take care.